Yeah, so I feel like I've had a somewhat unique and interesting path because I was born and raised in Portugal. Um, so my mom's American and my dad's Portuguese, and I was kind of torn in between both of these worlds. And I actually I do speak both languages, but I think at the time I struggled a lot with that mix, and it was very confusing to me as a child. And I think about maybe six. That's when my parents asked me to play piano and take piano lessons, and I think that was the moment when I sorry, that was the moment when I realized that music, it can be a language of sorts, and it's like an emotional language, and I just was immediately drawn to it. And I didn't like the actual piano lessons because they were kind of, I don't know, it was very kind of lots of rules and things like that. But the actual like music and that kind of expressiveness really was really interesting to me. So from there, I mean, I kind of dabbled in it. When you're a kid, you don't really think about these things. And a couple of years later, I discovered Nirvana, and that made me want to play guitar. So the great thing about Nirvana is that it's a band that their music is really accessible and really easy, but it's still really good. So as a kid that didn't know how to play guitar, it could still kind of like figure it out and play something, and it, I could kind of like stumble through it, and it still sounded semi-decent. So in that process, I learned how to play guitar and do all this stuff, and that's when I really started to write my own material, like very early on, even like 13, 14. Just kind of dabbling with it. This is all pre-internet, recording. There really wasn't an outlet for me to try my hand at songwriting in a more traditional sense. Actually, I think I was maybe 15 years old. My parents bought like a cereal box, and in the cereal box there was a CD with a recording program. Like, this is a very bizarre thing. I've actually tried to track it down to figure out like how this happened, but for whatever reason, it turned out to be like a recording program where I could essentially record myself over and over again, and basically build a song from scratch. And that really set me down that path. Like, once I realized the power of recording and technology, it's like, whoa, this is amazing. Like, I can do so much with this. At that point, I was just an angry teenager, and I got into like metal bands and things like that. And that's really when I dove into music on a technical level, like, learning how to play more complex stuff. And I just loved it. It was like really kind of, nerdy and and fun. And also like just like the intensity of metal in general is it's not something I actively listen to now, but there's something really powerful about it, and especially as an angry teenager, that was really cool. After that, I just started recording and writing all this stuff like over and over and over again. And I think I wrote probably like 10 or 15 albums, like of just like my own little instrumental pieces, and I would find singers to work with and other things like that. So it was just kind of an explosion of creativity, and I really think back on that time pretty fondly. And after that, I think I really considered music as a serious career path for me, and I was really interested in it. But I also lived in Portugal, which is a relatively small place. There's not, population 10 million. There's not a ton of opportunities for me. So I even tried after high school to see if I could make it work there, and nothing really ever happened. And had a couple little minor successes, but nothing too serious. So I kind of figured, well, I have American citizenship. Maybe I'll move to the U.S., go to college, see what happens. And that's what I did. So I moved to Greenville, Illinois, of all places. It's the middle of nowhere. No music industry anywhere remotely close to it. It's maybe like 4 or 5 hours away from Chicago. That was sort of the beginning of the internet, and a lot of things were happening. The internet had been around, but the beginning of the internet as a vehicle to spread music. So I went to college there, and that's really where I kind of had this idea to start, essentially a remix company of sorts. My idea was actually really to start a business as a service for labels, a creative service. So if a label, they had a single, they needed a remix for the single, I would provide that service as an income, but also as just a way to kind of get into the industry. And my idea was actually to bring in a lot of people and eventually pass on work to other people. But basically, everybody always wanted me to do everything. So it kind of turned into a solo project, and the remixing. Very early on, I feel like I got really lucky. This was maybe my sophomore year of college. I was at that point where I was like, okay, what am I doing with my life? I'm in college. Like, what am I going to do after? Like, I was applying for internships. I was getting nothing. Partly because I was in the middle of nowhere. It's literally population 7,000. I figured, I could do this remixing thing. Let's just see what happens. And I started cold calling everybody I possibly could. And turns out that the first client that I got was actually the Shins. So it was like a huge band to get hooked up with. And I think they really gave me an opportunity, and a huge opportunity that I'm still very grateful for. And that really kind of set me on this path for the rest, for the past 10 years now. It's funny because I actually, this is a time where people still put their phone number on their website. So I just called them. I called their manager, and I was like, "Hey, I'm a kid. I didn't say that, but I was like, I have a couple of remixes that I had done for fun. I showed them what I had done, and they were like, sure, try it out. I think what may have happened was that they had never been asked before, because they were more of an indie rock band, and nobody had thought about remixing bands like that. So it was kind of just right time, right place kind of thing. And the song did really well. It got picked up on Pitchfork and like all these websites. And like suddenly I had a calling card of sorts. So I was able to reach out to many more people. And was able to say, hey, look, check it out. I've been on this website. The Shins, commissioned a remix. I could use that to further my career. And from there, things have just been nonstop. It started out with remixing, and that's still still a huge part of my career. I've later, in the past, maybe 4 or 5 years, I basically moved over to original music as well. And that really took off in a significant way, much more than I expected ever. And yeah, I've kind of been I've been kind of going ever since, just kind of along for the ride. It's been a blur. It's been 10 years, but it's been crazy. That's a very short version. I think to talk about the new album, I need to talk about it in context of my career, and in context compared to the last record. So when I first had the idea of getting into original music, I had a pretty nice career as a DJ, and I was traveling all over the world, and it was great. It wasn't something I actively pursued, but something that I kind of fell into. And I just figured, maybe I'll do some dance music, a couple 12-inch singles, something like that, something for the DJs. And when I actually sat down to write it, nothing like that was coming out. A lot of music is unintentional, and you kind of just go with it. So that's basically what happened with that. It was like all these songs I was writing, they're not really like dance music. It's more like pop music and more songwriting based, which is really where I'm coming from. So when I was getting into original material, I decided to basically reach out to all these people that I had been working on like with remixes, or maybe people that I met on tour, things like that, and so some people that I hadn't even met yet. But I just started sending out demos to people that I liked and just see what happens. And then just people kept sending stuff back, and an album started to take shape, and it really was very different than what I was doing before. And it felt a little more honest. It felt a little more like what I was trying to do, or like felt more like me, I guess, as opposed to a DJ stuff which is something that I kind of fell into. So I called the album Strangers, and that was because I had done everything remotely. I had done everything through the internet, which is a bit weird, but that's how most things are done these days. And I don't know, it was fun. It was an interesting experience. It's actually funny because there's a lot of the artists from that album that I still, to this day, 5 years later, have not met. And, those are songs that mean a lot to me, and and it's just kind of funny how that's worked out. I didn't really know what to expect. Like I thought it would do well, or I thought I'd have some success, or at least on the same level as the remixes, or at least I hoped for. But what ended up happening is that this thing just blew up, and suddenly we were touring everywhere with a band, and it was just it got really crazy for really like 3 years, and I didn't really know how to deal with that. Like there's not really many things in life that can prepare you for that. For success or for anything, and especially when it's unexpected like that. And I mean, I was obviously very appreciative, but it's like suddenly people recognize you on the street, and it's weird. It's very strange, especially for an introvert like me. Like I'm not. It's not my vibe. When I started to think about a new album, I think I just felt like I needed to channel all of those kind of emotions into that. Music is my way of processing a lot of those things, and figuring out how I feel about it, and I really do see it as a language. So when I started writing stuff, I knew that I needed to do something different, and my approach was to, instead of doing it remotely through the internet, to do it in person, and to travel to people, meet them somewhere, wherever it is, and even if we don't do the full song, at least do something. And what that led to was a lot of conversations and just talking about life, talking about music, talking about what it means to us, and share that experience, because it's somewhat unique, and not everybody can relate to that. And I think it kind of seeped into the music in some way. I called the album Ego, because it was me figuring out like who I am and who I am as an artist, and like what am I trying to say, like what are my influences, like what do I truly care about, and really kind of distancing myself from what's the current trends or whatever, just like forgetting about that, and just like let me do something that I really care about. I mean, it was a 3-year process. I wrote maybe like 40 to 50 songs with a variety of different singers, and eventually kind of had to painfully narrow that down to I think 13 or 14 now. It was also very important to me to make an album, to make something that was cohesive from the start to finish, and it was also very important to me to make it a full listening experience, so you could start at the top and it basically doesn't stop until the end. So it's all one piece of music, and that was something to me that when I was like 15 or 16, when I would listen to other bands do that really made an impression on me. Like I really appreciated that. So my hope was to kind of carry that torch, and for some other 15-year-old out there, hopefully. It ended up being a very personal thing, and despite working with a variety of different collaborators and people that I love their music and really admire what they do, but through those conversations, and I feel like I got something a little bit extra out of it, something that's a little bit more of my own, aside from the musical side of it. And I guess at the end of it, that's what came out, or what's about to come out, I guess. I mean, I think emotion is at the core of music. I think it's the single most important thing in music, and you can really tell when there isn't any. On a personal level, it's my way of expressing that side of myself, which isn't always the most comfortable thing to express, but music is a great way to do that. I really appreciate that the music sort of transcends language and location and everything, and transcends time in some deep way. And this goes so far back into human history that people don't really know when it started, and for whatever reason, humans are drawn to, making noise and then, eventually creating something, or like how humans found that, melodies can be compatible and, can create harmony. And I don't know, there's something really deep inside that I don't fully understand, but for whatever reason, it resonates with me and resonates with a lot of other people. So I think it's really important to bring out the human side of it, and I think people can tell. I think it makes a difference. It's a weird job because you do have to think about the commerce side of it, and do you make something that's accessible? Do you make something that is pure emotion? Like what does that even mean? And the way I've found that works for me is really to think of accessibility, or let's say pop music. Think of it more as a structure, not as a sound, just as a set of basic rules that you can follow, or bend a little bit, and then everything else is fair game, and you can really start to develop all these other ideas and things around that. And I that's really where I get excited about music, is kind of making weird stuff within the context of pop music. I think a career highlight, I have a couple, I guess. There was one where I was asked to do a remix for Bob Marley, and from the Marley family directly, so that was pretty cool. And when you get that email, you say yes, of course. So they sent me the files. I opened them up, and so I'll back up a little bit. So they sent me the files for the song "Could You Be Loved," which is a very, very well-known song. And when I opened up the files, I realized that they were sounding a little bit different, and I wasn't sure what was going on. And it felt slower. It seemed like some stuff was missing. I was like, what's going on? And I realized that through some digging, we found out that they actually had lost the original tapes of the song in a fire or something like 20 years ago. And all they had was this demo version, and what turned out to be basically like a demo version that hadn't been heard before. And it's just it's Bob Marley and I guess a couple core members just in the studio somewhere in Jamaica, like really just hashing it out, really figuring it out. So it was basically an unfinished version of the song. And here I am listening to Bob Marley 30, 40 years later, figuring it out. And I was probably one of the only people ever in the world to listen to that, so that was pretty cool for me. Of course, the daunting task that I had for me was to recreate the entire song with those simple elements, but it was still it was a challenge, but it was pretty cool to kind of have a behind the scenes peek at that. I guess another more recent highlight that I had was in 2015, sort of at the culmination of everything that happened with Strangers and all that. We were playing. We played two festivals. One was Ultra in Miami, and the other one was Coachella here in LA area, kind of. And those are two very distant worlds to me, like the electronic world and the more band-oriented world. I don't know. I felt pretty proud to be able to be a part of both of those. So that was pretty special for me. And especially with Coachella, because in college, when I was dreaming about all this stuff, I would watch the DVDs and watch all these performances and about all these people basically baking in the sun but playing. I don't know, it was a pretty surreal experience to be there and perform there. I don't know, those come to mind. I think the thing that excites me the most about now is, after working on this album for so long, is to go out and tour this stuff, tour the new material, and it's something that I've I guess when I'm working in the studio, I don't really think about the live show, because that would drive me crazy. So I basically have the job of adapting all that material to a live setting, which is a challenge in of itself. And we're starting to do that now, and we have a US tour in September, and just kind of gearing up for that. So I don't know, I'm really excited to kind of get out there and play this stuff live, because I don't know, the material just means a lot to me. So I don't know, seeing it, like playing it and performing, is sort of just the other side of it.